Welcome to Mind Body Besties, your weekly reset with real talk, a little laughter, and the kind of honest conversations you'd have with your closest friend. I'm Katie, a therapist.
And I'm Rachel, a naturopathic doctor. We're here to share the personal stories, struggles, and wins that have shaped our own health and happiness. This isn't a lecture, it's a safe space to slow down, connect, and feel a little more human again. So grab your coffee, get cozy, and let's reset together.
Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to have a little mental health episode for you, and we are going to be talking about PANS and PANDAS, which is kind of adjacent to OCD, which is my favorite topic.
Yeah, and I love PANS and PANDAS because this isn't like the functional realm. It's such an overlap with the immune system and psychiatry that there's not a lot of specialists that do it because it doesn't fall neatly in a category, and there's no nice, neat blood test for it. So a lot of people like to pretend it's not a thing. So I like talking about PANS PANDAS.
Cool. Rachel, kick us off with what is PANS and what is PANDAS?
Yes. So PANDAS is like the first most recognized one, which is pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcal infections. And yes, I always have to look that up to say the full name. But basically, after you get strep throat or some other kind of strep infection, you can get this huge immune response, and it affects your behavior and your brain because your immune response causes brain inflammation and a bunch of other things. And then PANS is pretty much anything that's not strep. So it stands for pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome. This one's even more controversial than PANDAS. This is basically like the big broad umbrella because anything, Lyme, like anything that can trigger a neuropsychiatric huge behavior shift and a brain change would fall under PANS. And we're usually looking at like this is in kids that we're looking at these.
And what's kind of crazy about both of these is they just show up one day out of nowhere. And a lot of times it comes up in kids. And so parents are like, oh my gosh, what happened to my kid? They changed overnight and now have all of these issues. So it's kind of scary. And it is it's a really big deal.
It's super scary. And traditionally, when this happened, people would say that the kid was possessed because the change was so drastic. And some of the behaviors that kids do, like, I've been on a video, I'm not going to lie, it was a little scary. The kid was like, when they had the behavior change, they spoke in a deep, really raspy voice, and they had all of these ideations of like harming their sibling and stuff. And I could see how in the past when people didn't have this information, they'd be like, that's possession, because it's such a crazy change in behavior.
Yeah, I haven't seen it a lot, but when I have seen it, it's very, very similar to OCD, but more severe, and also it just comes out of nowhere. So what are the hallmark symptoms of PANS or PANDAS?
So it's overnight symptoms that would be associated with a change in the brain. So it's usually OCD type symptoms, tics, which I know you'll be able to tell us about, and at least a couple of other things that can vary a lot between people. So some kids get really severe anxiety or separation anxiety. They get mood swings, irritability, aggression. Regression is what we call like baby talk or being clingy, kind of going back in your developmental age. They might do poorly in school all of a sudden. Almost across the board, everyone has sensory sensitivities, light, sound, touch, trouble sleeping, might start bedwetting again or have almost symptoms of a UTI. Handwriting can get really bad and other fine motor skills, and then getting really picky or changing your food habits.
I have seen it show up as that, and the term that we would use would be avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, where, all of a sudden kids will only eat like very few safe foods. It kind of looks like an eating disorder, but it's not. It's all of a sudden that they can't stand the taste of certain things, or the texture of certain things will just make them want to throw up. They just can't do it anymore. And so they eat like 2 or 3 foods, usually.
Yeah. So how do you, when you are working with someone or seeing this come up in your history as a therapist, do you feel like they're getting the care they need from the doctors that they're seeing?
No, but Mostly because the people that I end up seeing when they have PANS or PANDAS, it's usually showing up like OCD. And so the parents and the kid, obviously, it's not even on their radar that this could be related to an infection. So they'll show up and say, yeah, my kid is really struggling with OCD. All of a sudden, they have all these compulsions that they have to do. They're not themselves. They're angry. They're irritable. Sometimes the food thing shows up. And so if an adult came in with those things, I wouldn't be thinking PANS or PANDAS. And usually it's not. It's that they're having a flare up of their OCD when it's really bad. But anytime it's a kid, I always think first, like, is this PANS or PANDAS? And so a lot of times I'll ask the parent, I'll be like, hey, I know this is a weird question, but has your kid had one, have they specifically had strep recently? Or were they really sick recently with any infection at all? And then did this come on suddenly? And a lot of times it'll be like, honestly, the parents say, they're like, I don't know. And I say, okay, I would highly, highly recommend looking up PANS and PANDAS. I'll tell you what I know, but I want you to like go Google this and read through everything and then see if you can find a doctor that knows about this, because you're going to need both of us. Only doing exposure therapy for this is not going to solve it because there are other issues going on. So usually it's like all of a sudden this kid has wild OCD. And then I'm like, this could be PANS or PANDAS.
Because it's so sudden.
Yes.
You know, and that's part of the controversy too, is like, can this happen in adults? And our brains are more developed. But have you ever seen anyone who's an adult who has sudden onset OCD?
No, sometimes that's their interpretation of it, but we'll dive deeper and I'll be like, all right, let's do your entire history. I want to know everything. And to me, I'm like, okay, that's an OCD behavior. Okay, do you see where this is like the same thing, just not as severe? And then we'll get to a point where there was some recent trauma, and that's why it seems so sudden and flared up. So honestly, no, I haven't seen that in adults.
Because I also have never seen an adult who meets the criteria for it. Although I have seen, and with my own personal experience, infections like Lyme and stuff, they do cause brain inflammation. And so I could have met all of the criteria for ADHD at one time. So I do see that. But yeah, I haven't seen PANS PANDAS symptoms in adults either.
The kids that I've seen have been, I think one was 9 and one was 13.
That makes sense. And with this, therapy is often recommended, and I think it's so helpful and it's definitely needed. And then what about, have you seen people taking SSRIs or taking psych meds for anything like this?
One of my clients, I believe the older one, did get on an SSRI and it helped some, but it was pretty clear. And like, I'm not shitting on SSRIs, I've taken them. It was pretty clear that it was like a Band-Aid and it was helping. So it got her out of panic mode, but it wasn't enough. Like she was still really struggling with the OCD behaviors.
That makes sense to me because I think a lot of people are quick to say if an SSRI helps, that confirms that it's purely psychiatric.
No.
But yeah, SSRIs are anti-inflammatory. And that's actually probably why they help so many people, because not everyone has a serotonin deficiency. It's probably just because they're calming brain inflammation.
Yeah. So earlier, before we were going to record, you said, because this is so controversial. And I said, what? PANS and PANDAS is controversial? It's in the DSM. There's actual criteria and you do have to meet certain things. And these kids that I saw met all of it.
Yeah.
So why is this controversial?
So first of all, I'm so glad it's in the DSM because that means in the therapist world, it's going to be caught if a kid gets taken to a therapist or a psychiatrist. But in the medical world, conventional medicine loves to say that things that don't have a way to test them aren't real. So like back before we had SIBO testing available and there were only private labs offered to functional, if functional doctors, anyone could do it, but only functional doctors were opting for it. Back then, in the conventional medicine sphere, SIBO wasn't real because there wasn't a way to test for it. And like, if you have a UTI and nothing grows on the culture, then you don't have a UTI, even though your infection is just one that it isn't able to grow on a culture. So I think that is why, is because doctors are like stressed back to back. They are pressured to make definitive diagnoses. I'm lucky as an ND because I would be judged by a medical board by a group of my peers. And my peers are going to have a really open mind because they're going to be taking all of this stuff into consideration. And we're the ones seeing the PANS PANDAS because they're not getting help with other doctors. But if an MD were to prescribe prophylactic antibiotics, like presumptive empirical antibiotics for this when they didn't have a positive test, if the kid suffered an adverse reaction from that, because antibiotics always have risks, then if they were taken before a group of their peers, they would probably be condemned for that and they could lose their license.
That's so sad.
Yeah, it is sad.
So from the medical standpoint, if someone came to you, what would you do for them?
Yeah, I mean, I would see what tests we can do to identify the infection because it's pretty much always an infectious response. Although I think that mold plays a role in it too. So I would look for, if not even just because it lowers your immune system, so you get worse infections. But I would look for what is stimulating and triggering your immune system. And there are tests that are, again, anyone can order them, but they're usually only done in the functional sphere. And there's really cool panels by Cyrex and other labs that check for some of these infections that cause brain responses. So it's like test for what we can, see if we can identify it, because antibiotics are not a one size fits all. Like, you'd have to be so specific. And even with herbs, there's not a single herb that treats every infection. And so I'd try to ID the infection. And if I couldn't, then I would just, based on their symptoms, I'd be like, okay, does this fit more of a Lyme picture? Does this fit more of strep? Is this more of a viral picture? And then based on that, I would give like empirical herbs. So without positive labs, I would still give antimicrobial treatment. And I would do it super low and slow because they're going to have die-off symptom, and it's actually going to make the PANS PANDAS worse temporarily, and that's not a bad thing. So they have to be informed about that.
Okay.
And then I would get them to find a doctor who will prescribe them IVIG and take that antibody plasma therapy so that they can get some of that help fighting off whatever infection is causing their PANS PANDAS.
So if someone were to never get any treatment for this, like they just never knew what it was, does that infection stay in their body forever? Or is it that it's just the symptoms left over from that infection? Like what happens if it never gets treated?
I've thought about this a lot. So yes, the infection can stay in the body. And so people can have recurrences and they do have relapses. And if it's an infection that isn't able to be fully eradicated easily, like Lyme, then pretty much we can guarantee it's always going to be there. But a lot of people do spontaneously heal from this and it'll just go away kind of like it came.
Easy.
Yeah, because the inflammation in your brain is suddenly gone and like no one is like squishing your brain anymore.
Yeah.
But the other part of it too, and like I think about your work with exposure therapy with this, is in that time you were sick, your brain created new pathways and it learned new fears. So like you still have to help repave that wiring and those trenches that were dug, probably for the time that you were sick.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, to give a couple examples, sometimes I forget to give examples and people are like, what are you talking about? Clients that I've worked with, and I'll change it a little bit, not that you would know who the client was, but like, for example, a kid who was like, quote, totally normal before would all of a sudden start thinking that they're a bad person and everything they're doing is wrong or inappropriate. So that's the obsession, is that they're bad and inappropriate and wrong somehow. So morality, OCD. And so they start taking out their phone in class and videoing everything they're doing so that they could show it to their parent later and make sure they didn't do something bad. So the compulsion is now that they're videoing everything and it's taking over their life and they're getting made fun of at school. And their parents are like, why are you showing me this? Why are you videoing everything? And so the parents get really frustrated and it blows up at home, basically. Or a kid that, previously was eating regularly flips out and will only eat 2 foods all of a sudden. And then the parents are like arguing with them, telling them, all right, well, then you're not eating, because they don't understand what's happening. And it, again, blows up at home. It's really hard when you're working with kids because they can't, at a certain age, they can kind of tell you what's going on. But most kids under the age of like 12 don't have any language for what's going on, how they're feeling, why they feel that way, and they can't explain what's going on.
And I'd imagine just a lot less self-awareness. You've had less like lived
Mhm.
experience navigating your health.
Yeah, and a lot of times those kids, sadly, then just get labeled the problem kid that's acting up or not doing what they're supposed to do, or they're so anxious they can't even go to school anymore. And that's why it's so crazy to me that people don't think this is real. I'm like,
Oh,
what
yeah.
do you think is happening?
No, I agree. There's so many things like that where it's like, come on, like be real.
This perfectly sweet, good little kid that was great at school didn't just wake up and decide to purposefully do nothing right and be a problem and have all these issues. Like something happened.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. And I feel like the heartbreaking thing is that people aren't getting care because people either don't know about or don't have access to more functional naturopathic type care. Or like you said, they just think this is like, oh, I guess they have OCD now. They don't realize that there's like something to be done physically. And not everyone is going to be a candidate for IVIG. And like, if that's the only treatment you're presented with, if you're even offered that, then there's so many other tools that could be used that people just don't know about. There's so many tools that help with gut health. There's natural ways to give your body those antibodies. It's not going to be as strong or as effective as IVIG, plasma, infusion therapy. But there's just so much stuff out there. And I think I just hate unnecessary suffering. That's what it is. I'm like, this is unnecessary suffering.
Yeah, I do too. And thankfully, we learned about PANS, PANDAS in school. Not a lot. It was probably like 10 minutes on, hey, there's also this thing called PANS, PANDAS when we were talking about OCD. But I mean, I would say probably 95% of us were like, what? What is that? We've never heard of that. And if I hadn't learned it in school, I don't know that I would have ever come across that.
Yeah, you wouldn't have recognized it when it's in front of you.
Yeah. And it's also easy to forget when they spend about 10 minutes on it in school, which there's so many different things in the DSM. You can't spend days on everything.
I just feel like this is missed so much. And we don't have all the information on what are all the infections that can cause it. So it's just presumptive. And it's like, just because our limited human research that we have so far doesn't know something doesn't mean it's clearly like it's happening in front of your face. It doesn't mean it's not happening. I hope that there's more care for this. I hope that it keeps coming up. It's gotten more and more attention, even at functional conferences. It started getting really big in, I think, 2020, I want to say, is when it really started like blowing up. So I do see people specializing in this now, which is really cool.
Good.
But it's hard because there's, with children, you do have more liability as a doctor if something goes wrong, because kids do have bigger reactions to things and they don't tolerate things as well. And if their brain was susceptible enough to have this response to an infection that's causing this brain inflammation, which is causing the behavior changes, then when you start killing that infection, you're going to get die-off and it's going to affect your brain. And like, what is that going to do? Even if it's the right antibiotic, could you get worse and have to be hospitalized and the parent doesn't understand that that antibiotic was the right choice? This isn't the nature of it. So I think more and more people hopefully are going to do research on this, and then we're going to get really concrete treatment paths so that even the doctors who want to go by the book and by the algorithm can have something to follow.
Yeah. And if you are a therapist or know a therapist, I really recommend finding some kind of holistic health practitioner in your area and like getting to know them or see if they're open to taking some referrals from you. Because just because something presents as mental health does not mean that's the only thing that it is. And so sometimes you need to send your clients to a medical doctor or a naturopathic doctor or a chiropractor, like whatever it is. There are lots of things that show up as mental health could actually benefit from a lot of different kinds of treatment.
Yeah, And I would say too, if you're a parent who has a kid with PANS, PANDAS, go get therapy too for yourself and give yourself some
Yeah.
self-care. Because this is really hard and you could do everything right. And the reality is, not every child fully recovers. And some children do have ongoing signs of PANDAS and like living with that. And, it's still your like lovely child, but having that change and it not feeling like the kid that you knew is really hard for a parent to go through.
Yeah, I absolutely recommend that. I would also see the parents of the kids because they were just scared and distraught and didn't
Yeah.
understand what was going on. So they needed help too, because it is really hard when your kid changes overnight.
It's like a full-time job as a parent,
Mhm.
you having to figure out like what to do about this. There's not widespread information about this. It's so devastating.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully this helps if you're navigating this or if you know anyone who you think that this might be something that they're dealing with. Hopefully this is helpful. It's always our intent is get the information out there and then you can have some knowledge about what to do to make your life better. So thank you for tuning in today, everyone.
Yep. We'll catch you in the next one.
Thanks for joining us for another weekly reset. If you loved hanging out with us today, subscribe so you never miss an episode and share this with a friend who could use a little calm and connection too.
This show is for education and inspiration, not medical advice. To learn more or connect with us, check out the show notes below. Until next time, take care of your mind, your body, and your heart.